The Colorado sun beat down on Cedar Ridge, a town that looked like it was carved from dust and desperation. For 24-year-old Glenna Parnell, it was the end of a 2,000-mile journey, and the beginning of the end of her life. She stepped down from the stagecoach, her worn dress clinging to her like a second skin. In her hand, a crumpled letter, a promise of marriage from a man she'd never met, a merchant named Alvis Penwell, a promise of security, a promise of a future. But every step she took toward her 25th birthday felt like a step off a cliff. Her Aunt Jossie's words echoed in her mind, a ghost story told in broad daylight. The Parnell curse, she'd called it. No woman in our bloodline who passes 25 unmarried ever finds a husband. They become spinsters, Glenna, dried-up old maids who die alone. 3 weeks. That's all she had. Aunt Jossie stepped out behind her, her eyes like a hawk's, scanning the dusty street. He should be here. Mr. Penwell was supposed to meet the afternoon stage. But there was no merchant, only a skinny kid, no older than 16, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He looked like he was about to deliver a death sentence. You, Miss Parnell? The one set to marry Mr. Alvis? Glenna's stomach turned to ice. Yes, where is he? The boy couldn't meet her eyes. He stared at his own worn-out boots. Well, miss, there's been a situation. He took a deep breath. Mr. Alvis, he up and married the banker's widow 3 days ago. Real sudden-like. The world tilted on its axis. Glenna could feel the eyes of the whole town on her, the jilted bride, the fool. He said to tell you he found himself a woman with established property. The words were a slap in the face. Jossie went pale. Married? But we had an agreement, a contract. The boy shrugged, a gesture of helpless pity. Yes, ma'am. But he said promises to mail-order brides ain't exactly legal contracts. He sent along $20 for your trouble. He held out the bills. $20 to erase a future. Glenna stared at the money, her throat closing up. No husband, no home, no hope. The curse was no longer a ghost story. It was real, and it was breathing down her neck. From across the street, a man watched. His name was Darvin Sturgill. At 35, he'd built a cattle empire that stretched further than most men could ride in a day. But since his wife Sarah died 2 years back, he'd become a ghost himself. Most folks in Cedar Ridge just saw a weathered cowboy, a simple ranch hand. They had no idea he was probably the wealthiest man in the territory. He liked it that way. Anonymity was a shield. Wealth brought vultures, women who saw dollar signs instead of a man. So he dressed in simple clothes, spoke when spoken to, and let people think what they wanted. But watching that dark-haired woman stand tall, even as her world crumbled around her, stirred something in him. A quiet dignity that reminded him so much of Sarah. He was supposed to be getting his own mail-order bride in 4 days. A practical solution to the crushing loneliness of his empty ranch house. But seeing Glenna, he suddenly wasn't so sure about practical solutions. Keep your money, Glenna's voice cut through the street's low murmur. It trembled, but it didn't break. I won't take charity from a man who couldn't keep his word. The boy looked relieved to be rid of the task. But miss, where will you go? She had no answer. Her life savings were gone, spent on a ticket to a life that had just vanished. Jossie grabbed her arm, her knuckles white. This is it, Glenna. The curse. It's happening. There's no curse, Aunt Jossie, Glenna said, though the words tasted like a lie. There is, and we have 3 weeks to break it. Before he knew what he was doing, Darvin was crossing the street. His boots kicked up clouds of red dust. Excuse me, ladies, he said, his voice low and steady. Couldn't help but overhear. Name's Darvin Sturgill. Jossie sized him up in a single glance. Worn jeans, faded shirt, just another broke cowboy. Her face fell. Thank you for your concern, Mr. Sturgill, but we can manage. But Glenna looked into his eyes. They were weathered, like his face, but there was a kindness in them, an honesty she hadn't seen in a long time. "I'm Glenna Parnell. This is my aunt, Mrs. Kimbrough." "Pleased to meet you," he said, and it sounded like he meant it. "I might have a proposition for you." Darvin's mind was racing. He needed help on his ranch, that was true, but looking at Glenna, an idea, wild and reckless, began to form. "I run a cattle operation, 10 miles north of here," he said, choosing his words carefully. "Lost my wife a couple years back. The place, it needs a woman's touch. I could use help with the cooking, the cleaning." Jossie's interest was piqued. "Employment? What are the wages?" "Room and board, fair wages, separate quarters, of course, everything proper." But that wasn't the real offer. That wasn't the wild idea. He looked at Glenna. He'd only known her for 10 minutes, but he saw something in her that felt more real than any of the society ladies he'd met in the last 2 years. "There's something else," he said, his voice dropping slightly. "I've been thinking, it's time I considered remarrying. The ranch is too big for one man." Glenna's breath caught in her throat. "Mr. Sturgill, are you—" "I'm suggesting we could help each other," he said plainly. "You need a husband to break this curse. I need a wife to help run my life. It wouldn't be a love match, not at first, but it would be an honest partnership." Jossie looked like she'd just seen a miracle. A proposal, right here on the street. But Glenna was cautious. She searched his face for a trick, a trap. "You don't know anything about me, Mr. Sturgill." "I know you didn't take that $20, he replied softly. "Sometimes you just have to take a chance on people. Something tells me you're worth the risk." The moment was shattered by the thunder of hooves. An expensive buggy, pulled by 2 perfectly matched black horses, tore down the street, stopping just inches from them. The man driving it was Luther Sorrell. He was handsome in the way that money makes a man handsome. Soft hands, expensive suit, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His ranch was famous in 3 counties. He was a man used to getting what he wanted, and his eyes, like a hawk spotting a field mouse, landed on Glenna. "Well now," he purred, stepping down from the buggy. "What have we here? Fresh off the stage, I'd wager." He completely ignored Darvin. "You wouldn't be the bride that fool Penwell was expecting, would you?" Glenna felt her cheeks burn. "I was, but Mr. Penwell has made other arrangements." "His loss," Sorrell said, stepping closer, his cologne thick and cloying, "is my gain. Luther Sorrell, at your service. I own the largest ranch in the territory, mining interests, livestock." Jossie's eyes went wide. She looked from Darvin's dusty boots to Sorrell's polished shoes. "Mr. Sorrell, what a pleasure to meet such a successful gentleman." Sorrell took Glenna's hand. He held it too long, his thumb stroking her knuckles in a way that made her want to pull away. "So, Miss Parnell, are you seeking new arrangements?" Darvin's jaw tightened. He knew Luther Sorrell, knew his reputation for cruelty and his endless ambition. "Actually," Darvin's voice cut in, sharp and clear, "Miss Parnell and I were just discussing arrangements of our own." Sorrell finally turned to look at Darvin, his eyes dripping with disdain. He saw a simple ranch hand, a nobody. "You?" He laughed. "What could a man like you offer a lady of her quality?" "Honest work," Darvin said, his voice even, "and respectful treatment." "How quaint," Sorrell sneered. He turned back to Glenna, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Miss Parnell, surely you see the difference? A dusty cabin or a grand estate? I'm offering you a mansion, servants, fine clothes, jewelry, trips to Denver, even San Francisco." "Oh, Glenna!" Jossie was practically bouncing. 20,000 acres, a 12-room house." "You would never have to work a day in your life," Sorrell added. "Just grace my home with your beauty." Glenna felt trapped. 2 offers, 2 futures. One was a simple, honest life with a man who seemed kind. The other was everything her aunt had ever dreamed of, offered by a man whose touch made her skin crawl. This is all happening so fast, she stammered. I hardly know either of you. Then allow me to remedy that, Sorel declared, his victory assured. I'm hosting a dinner party tomorrow night. The finest families in Colorado will be there. You will come as my guest. See my home. Meet the society you will be joining. He climbed back into his buggy, a smirk playing on his lips. As he rode away, Darvin felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. His own bride, Clara Morrison, was arriving in 3 days. But looking at Glenna's pale, determined face, he knew he couldn't let her fall into Luther Sorel's hands, no matter the cost. The next evening, Glenna stood in Luther Sorel's dining room, feeling like a moth trapped in a spider's web. She wore her mother's dress, a simple blue gown that felt plain and cheap next to the silk and satin of the other women. The table was a battlefield of silver and crystal. Jossie was in her element, chattering away about high society. Imagine, Glenna, you could be mistress of all this. But Glenna felt a growing chill. She watched the way Sorel treated his servants. He snapped at a young girl for filling his water glass too high. His words were quiet, but they carried a venom that made the girl flinch and tear up. Clumsy little thing, he said to Glenna with a dismissive wave. Good help is impossible to find among the locals. The casual cruelty of it made her stomach clench. During dinner, he bragged. He told stories of crushing his business rivals, of buying out desperate ranchers for pennies on the dollar after a bad winter. The key to success, he declared, stabbing a piece of steak, is to understand that sentiment is the enemy of profit. You can't let feelings get in the way. He was talking about cattle and land, but Glenna knew he was talking about people too. After dinner, he led her out onto the grand porch. The other guests were inside, sipping brandy. The night air was cool, but his presence felt suffocating. Well, my dear, he said, his voice smooth as silk, what do you think of your future home? It's very impressive, Mr. Sorel. I could make you happy here, Glenna. You'd never want for anything. His hand found her waist, his grip possessive and heavy. Of course, I would expect certain wifely duties. A son, perhaps 2, to carry on the Sorel name. I would be very generous in return. He wasn't proposing. He was negotiating a contract. She was an acquisition, a brood mare. Mr. Sorel, I appreciate your offer, but nothing. His grip tightened, his fingers digging into her side. It hurt. You're a practical woman, Glenna. You know you have no other real options. That dusty cowboy can offer you a life of dirt and poverty. I am offering you the world. She tried to pull away, but he moved to block her. Don't be coy. Your aunt told me all about your little problem. The family curse. Your birthday clock is ticking. The predatory glint in his eye was terrifying. He saw her desperation as a weakness to be exploited. I should go back inside. I think you should stop playing hard to get. His voice dropped to a low growl. I've made you a generous offer. Don't make the mistake of thinking you can do better. Suddenly, a voice cut through the darkness from the end of the porch. The lady said she wants to go inside. Sorel spun around. Darvin Sturgill was standing in the shadows, his face like carved granite. He wasn't dressed for a party. He was in his work clothes. But he stood there with an authority that had nothing to do with money or suits. What the hell are you doing here, Sturgill? This is private property. Miss Parnell sent word, asked me to come get her, said she needed a ride back to town. Darvin's eyes never left Sorel's face. His hand was resting near the gun on his hip. That's impossible, Sorel hissed. She's my guest. And now she's leaving with me. Darvin took a step forward. He was shorter than Sorel, but somehow he seemed to tower over him. You got a problem with that, Luther? Luther, not Mr. Sorel. Glenna saw a flicker of confusion in Sorel's eyes. A hired hand didn't use a man's first name like that. It was a challenge, a claim of equal standing. Just who do you think you are, Sturgill? Someone who doesn't like seeing women pushed around. Miss Parnell, are you ready? Glenna moved toward him, a wave of relief washing over her, but Sorel was faster. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in like claws. "She's not going anywhere with you." The change in Darvin was terrifying. It was instant. His hand shot out, grabbing Sorrel's wrist. It wasn't a punch, just a quiet, calculated application of pressure. Sorrel gasped, his face contorting in pain, and his hand flew open, releasing Glenna. "Touch her again," Darvin said, his voice dangerously calm, "and I'll break every finger on that hand. You can't threaten me. Do you know who I am?" "Yeah, Luther. I know exactly who you are." A cold, thin smile touched Darvin's lips. "The question is, do you know who I am?" For the first time all night, Luther Sorrel looked uncertain, scared. You're just some ranch hand, a nobody." "Actually," Darvin said, gently guiding Glenna down the porch steps toward his waiting horse, "I'm your neighbor, the one 10 miles north, the DLS ranch." Sorrel's face went white in the moonlight. The DLS ranch, the Darvin Luther Sturgill ranch, the only operation in the territory that was bigger and more successful than his own. "That would be me," Darvin said. As they rode away, Glenna could hear Sorrel behind them, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and dawning, horrified understanding. "The DLS ranch," she breathed, as they moved through the quiet, moonlit night. "That's one of the biggest in Colorado." "Never said I was poor," Darvin replied, his eyes on the trail ahead. "Just said I was a rancher, letting people assume things. It tells you a lot about their character." But as they rode, Darvin's mind was not on Luther Sorrel. It was on the stagecoach that was due to arrive in Cedar Ridge in 2 days, the stagecoach carrying Clara Morrison, the woman who was coming all this way to marry him. The scandal of what had just happened would be all over the territory by morning, and it would be the first thing she heard when she stepped into town. 2 days later, the morning stage arrived, and with it a storm named Clara Morrison. She was a prim woman in her 30s, with a face that looked like it had been carved from a sour apple. Before her bags were even off the coach, the town gossips had descended like vultures, filling her ears with the juicy tale of her fiancé and the beautiful young woman he'd rescued from the clutches of Luther Sorrel. "Absolutely disgraceful!" Clara's voice was sharp enough to cut glass and loud enough for half the town to hear. "I came 2,000 miles to marry a respectable rancher, not some frontier Romeo who brawls on porches over dance hall girls." Sheriff Carson Belcher, a portly man with a weary expression, tried to calm her down. "Now, Miss Morrison, if you'd just let Mr. Sturgill explain—" "Explain what?" she shrieked. Her voice carried across the street to where Glenna and Jossie were buying supplies. "The facts are quite clear. Mr. Sturgill has publicly compromised himself, and that woman, I will not be a party to this scandal." Without another word, she turned on her heel, climbed right back onto the stagecoach, and slammed the door. Her final words rang out across the town square, a parting shot aimed directly at Glenna. "Let him marry his harlot if that's what he wants." The word hung in the air. Harlot. Every eye in town turned to Glenna. Some were sympathetic, most were not. She was the Scarlet Woman, the cause of a public humiliation for one of the territory's most powerful men. "This is a disaster," Jossie whispered, her face ashen. "Your reputation is in shreds. His is. The entire territory will be talking about this for months." That evening, there was a knock on their hotel room door. It was Darvin. He stood there, hat in hand, his face grim. "Miss Parnell, Mrs. Kimbrough, I owe you both an apology. My actions have created a very difficult situation." "It wasn't your fault," Glenna said quietly. "You were defending me." "It is my fault," he insisted. "I knew what confronting Luther would lead to. I should have been smarter about it. And now, you've been insulted in the middle of town because of me." He took a deep breath. "But I have a solution, if you're willing to hear it." Jossie leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with hope. "What kind of solution?" Darvin looked directly at Glenna. His gaze was steady, his face serious. "Marriage." Glenna's heart stopped. "Tomorrow," he continued. You become my replacement bride. It's the only way. Mr. Sturgill, think about it, Miss Parnell. It's practical. You need a husband before your birthday to break this curse you believe in. I need a wife to repair my reputation after Miss Morrison's performance. After what happened, the whole territory expects me to marry you anyway. We might as well give them what they want. It made a twisted kind of sense, a marriage of convenience, a business arrangement to solve both their problems. But what about love? She whispered, the word feeling foolish on her tongue. Darvin's expression softened, but his voice was firm. This isn't about love, Miss Parnell. This is about survival, and there's something else you need to know. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping low. Luther Sorrell is not a man who gives up. He's already been in town today asking questions about you, spreading rumors, making it clear he considers you unfinished business. Marrying me isn't just about your reputation. It's about your safety. You need protection, and you need it now. Their wedding was a quiet, hurried affair. The preacher smelled of whiskey, and the only witnesses were Aunt Jossie and a bewildered Sheriff Belchour. The ride out to the DLS ranch was silent. Glenna felt a sense of unreality, as if she were watching her life happen to someone else. She was Mrs. Darvin Sturgill, the mistress of a cattle empire, and the wife of a total stranger. The ranch house wasn't a mansion like Sorrell's, but it was large and solid, built of dark wood and river stone. Inside, however, it felt empty. It was clean, but it lacked a soul. It was the house of a man who had lost his heart. The ghost of his first wife, Sarah, was everywhere. In the faded needlepoint pillows on the sofa, in the small, worn Bible on the nightstand, in the sad, distant look in her new husband's eyes. Darvin was a perfect gentleman. He was polite, considerate. He showed her to her own room, a spacious chamber with a view of the mountains. You'll be comfortable here, he'd said. Take all the time you need to adjust. He was treating her like a guest, not a wife. The first few weeks were a delicate, awkward dance. They shared meals in near silence. They spoke of the weather, of the cattle, of the day-to-day running of the ranch. They never spoke of what had brought them together. They never spoke of Sarah. But Glenna was not one to sit idle. She started small. She aired out the stuffy rooms. She planted a small garden of herbs and vegetables near the kitchen. She found Sarah's old recipe book and began trying the dishes, filling the silent house with the smells of baking bread and roasting meat. Slowly, painstakingly, she began to bring the house back to life. And slowly, painstakingly, she began to see the real Darvin Sturgill, not the reclusive widower or the mysterious cattle baron, but the man. She saw the way his face lit up when he spoke of his horses. She saw his quiet patience with the ranch hands. She saw the deep, lonely sadness that sometimes settled in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. One night, a late spring storm rolled in, shaking the house with thunder. Glenna found Darvin sitting on the porch, staring out at the lightning-streaked sky. You can't sleep either? She asked softly. He shook his head. Storms remind me of her. Sarah loved the rain. It was the first time he had said her name to Glenna. She sat down in the chair next to him, pulling a shawl around her shoulders. For a long time they just sat there, listening to the rain drum on the roof. Tell me about her, Glenna said, her voice barely a whisper. And he did. He told her how they had met, how they had built the ranch from nothing. He spoke of her laughter, of her strength, of her kindness. He didn't speak like a man mourning a ghost, but like a man honoring a beautiful memory. As he spoke, the wall between them began to crumble, but a new wall was being built around them. The trouble started subtly. A section of fence cut on the north pasture, a prize bull found dead near a watering hole, the water testing positive for poison. Darvin dismissed it at first. Ranch life is hard. Accidents happen. Neighbors get into disputes. But then a dozen head of prime cattle vanished overnight. vanished without a trace. That wasn't an accident. That was rustling. That was a direct attack. Sheriff Belchur rode out to investigate. He looked grim and worried. "I've got no leads, Darvin. It's like they were ghosts. No tracks. No one saw anything." "It's Sorrel," Darvin said, his voice flat and hard. "This has his smell all over it." "I can't arrest a man on a smell," the sheriff sighed. "Luther's got powerful friends. I need evidence. Hard evidence." The attacks escalated. A barn was set on fire in the middle of the night. They managed to save the horses, but the fire was a message. A warning. Fear began to creep into the DLS ranch. The hands grew jumpy. Glenna found herself looking over her shoulder every time she stepped outside. She saw the toll it was taking on Darvin. The long nights he spent riding the perimeter, the worry etched into the lines on his face. This ranch wasn't just his business. It was his life. It was Sarah's legacy. And it was being systematically destroyed. One afternoon, while cleaning out an old desk in the study, Glenna found a small, locked wooden box. It was tucked away in a back drawer, covered in dust. Her curiosity got the better of her. She found a small key on Darvin's keychain that fit the lock. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a collection of letters. They were written in a delicate, feminine hand. They were love letters. But they weren't from Darvin. They were from Luther Sorrel, and they were addressed to Sarah Sturgill. The ink on the page was faded, but the words were a venom that time had not diluted. They were passionate, obsessive letters. Sorrel wrote of his undying love for Sarah, his fury at her choice to marry a simple man like Darvin. He wrote of his wealth, of the life he could give her, a life she deserved more than anyone. But as Glenna read on, the tone shifted. It became darker, more demanding. The last letter was different. It wasn't a plea. It was a threat. "If I cannot have you, Sarah, then no man will. You will be mine in this life or the next. I swear it." The date on the letter was 1 week before Sarah's death. The official report, as Darvin had told her, was a riding accident. Her horse had spooked, throwing her against a rocky outcrop. A tragic, senseless accident. But holding this letter, Glenna felt a cold dread seep into her bones. It wasn't an accident. It was murder. She heard the back door open and quickly shoved the letters back into the box, her heart hammering against her ribs. Darvin walked in, his face streaked with soot from a small brush fire they'd spent the morning fighting. He looked exhausted, defeated. "It was set," he said, his voice rough with fatigue. "We found the oil rags." He sank into the chair behind the desk, running a hand over his face. "He's trying to break me, Glenna. He's trying to drive me off my own land." She looked at the man she had married out of necessity, the man she was slowly, undeniably, beginning to fall in love with. And she looked at the box in her hands. This secret was a poison. It had been slowly killing Darvin for 2 years, and now it was threatening to destroy them both. "Darvin," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "we need to talk. About Sarah. About how she really died." He looked up, his eyes clouded with confusion and a flicker of old pain. "What are you talking about? It was an accident." She slid the wooden box across the desk. "I don't think it was." He stared at the box, then at her. He recognized it. He opened it, his hands shaking as he pulled out the letters. He read them, one by one, his face growing paler with each page. When he finished the last one, he looked up at her. The grief in his eyes was raw, but beneath it, something new was burning. A cold, terrifying rage. "All this time," he whispered, "I suspected. I felt it in my gut, but I had no proof. I thought I was going crazy with grief." He stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "I'm going to kill him." "No!" Glenna stood up, blocking his path. "Darvin, that's what he wants. He wants you to do something reckless. He'll have the law on his side." We have to be smart about this. Smart? He murdered my wife, Glenna. He's burning down my home. There's no time to be smart. Yes, there is, she insisted, her voice rising with a strength she didn't know she possessed. These letters. They're a motive, but they're not proof of murder. We need more. We need to find something that connects him directly to her. Her accident. A sudden memory flashed in her mind. Something Aunt Jossie had been rambling about when they first arrived. The curse, Glenna said suddenly. Aunt Jossie, she went on and on about the Parnell curse. She said it started generations ago, with an ancestor who was wronged by a powerful family. She looked at Darvin, a wild idea taking shape. She never told me the family's name. I need to ask her. They found Jossie in the garden, humming to herself as she pulled weeds. Glenna knelt beside her. Aunt Jossie, I need you to tell me something. The Parnell curse. You said it started with an ancestor who was wronged. Who was that family? What was their name? Jossie's face clouded over. She looked uncomfortable. Oh, it's just an old family story, dear. Silly superstition. It's not silly, Glenna pressed. It's important. Please. What was the name? Jossie sighed, twisting her apron in her hands. The story goes that our great-great-grandmother, Elspeth Parnell, was engaged to a wealthy landowner back east. But he was a cruel man. She broke off the engagement and married a simple farmer for love. The landowner was furious. He ruined them. He swore that no woman in her bloodline would ever find happiness. What was his name, Jossie? Darvin's voice was low and intense. Jossie wrung her hands. She finally whispered the name as if afraid to say it out loud. Sorel. The family's name was Sorel. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place. This wasn't just about land or jealousy. This was a vendetta, a generational sickness passed down from father to son. Luther Sorel wasn't just trying to possess Glenna. He was trying to fulfill his ancestors' curse. He was trying to destroy the Parnells just as he had destroyed Sarah. Suddenly, they heard horses approaching. Fast. Sheriff Belshur rode into the yard, followed by 2 deputies. But he wasn't alone. Riding beside him, looking smug and triumphant, was Luther Sorel. Darvin Sturgill, the sheriff said, his voice heavy with regret. I have a warrant for your arrest. Darvin's hand went to his gun. Arrest? For what? For cattle rustling, Sorel said, a wide grin spreading across his face. My cattle. We found the whole herd branded with your DLS mark, hidden in a canyon on your property. It was a frame-up, a perfect, undeniable frame-up. That's a lie, Glenna cried out. I'm afraid not, ma'am, the sheriff said, his eyes avoiding hers. The evidence is clear. Darvin, don't make this difficult. Darvin looked at Sorel's triumphant face. He looked at the guns of the deputies, and he looked at Glenna. He saw the trap. If he resisted, they'd shoot him down right here. Slowly, he raised his hands. As the deputies put him in cuffs, Sorel dismounted and walked over to Glenna. Looks like your cowboy's luck has run out, he murmured, his voice dripping with false sympathy. A shame. Now this big, lonely ranch, a beautiful woman like you, all alone. Don't you worry, my dear. I'll take good care of you, and everything that belongs to you. He was going to take everything, the ranch, her. As they led Darvin away, he locked eyes with Glenna. He didn't say a word, but his expression was clear. Find the proof. It's the only way. The DLS ranch felt like a tomb. The ranch hands were spooked, whispering in corners, unsure of who to trust. They knew Darvin was innocent, but the evidence was stacked against him. Sorel's power was absolute. Glenna was alone, but she wasn't defeated. She spent the next 2 days tearing the house apart. She searched every book, every ledger, every drawer. She was looking for something, anything, that Sarah might have left behind. A diary, a note, a clue. She found nothing. Despair began to set in. Darvin's trial was set for the end of the week. It would be a farce. Sorrel owned the judge, the prosecutor, everyone. Darvin would be convicted. He would hang, and Sorrel would win. On the third night, unable to sleep, Glenna found herself in the barn. The smell of hay and horses was comforting. She ran a hand along the flank of Sarah's favorite mare, a gentle palomino named Willow. "What happened out there, girl?" she whispered to the horse. "What did you see?" As her hand moved over the horse's worn leather saddle, she felt something odd. A small lump, tucked away under the fender, where it wouldn't be easily seen or felt. Her fingers trembled as she worked at the stitching. It was old and tight, but she managed to pry it loose with a pocket knife. Inside, wrapped in a small piece of oilcloth, was a folded piece of paper. It was a land survey receipt. It was dated 2 days before Sarah's death, and it was for a section of land deep in the mountains, a piece of property that bordered both the DLS ranch and Sorrel's land. But the shocking part was the name of the geologist who had signed it, a man named Silas Croft. Scrawled at the bottom in Sarah's handwriting were 2 words: "He knows." Glenna stared at the receipt, her mind racing. Why would Sarah hide this? Why was this piece of land so important? And what did Silas Croft know? She remembered Darvin mentioning the name once. Croft was a prospector, a geologist who had a reputation for being the best in the territory. He was also a notorious drunk who had left town a couple of years back. Around the same time, Sarah had died. She had to find him. The next morning, she rode into town. She avoided the stares and the whispers. She went to the one person she thought might help, the young boy who had delivered the bad news from Alvis Penwell all those weeks ago. His name was Billy. He did odd jobs all over town. He saw and heard everything. She found him sweeping the porch of the general store. "Billy," she said, her voice low and urgent. "I need to find a man, a prospector named Silas Croft. Do you know where he went?" Billy looked nervous. "Mr. Croft? He ain't been around here for a couple years, Mrs. Sturgill. Folks say he struck it rich and moved on." "I don't think he struck it rich," Glenna said. "I think he was paid to disappear. It's important, Billy. It's a matter of life and death." The boy saw the desperation in her eyes. He glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "He didn't move on," he whispered. "He's up in the mountains. Got a little cabin in a place called Whisperin' Canyon. Most folks stay clear. Say he's gone crazy." He gave her directions. It was a dangerous ride, through rough country. But she didn't hesitate. She found the cabin tucked away in a narrow, shadowed canyon. It was little more than a shack. An old man with wild gray hair and eyes that were haunted by years of cheap whiskey sat on the porch, holding a shotgun across his lap. "Get off my land," he growled. "Mr. Croft? My name is Glenna Sturgill. I need to talk to you about Sarah Sturgill." The man's face went slack. The shotgun wavered. "Sarah? I don't know no Sarah." "Yes, you do," Glenna said, dismounting and taking a cautious step forward. She held up the receipt. "You did a survey for her, 2 years ago, right before she died. I need you to tell me what you found." Croft's eyes filled with a terrible, drunken fear. "I found nothing. Just rock and dirt." "You're lying," Glenna said, her voice shaking with intensity. "What did you find, Silas? What did Sorrel pay you to forget?" At the mention of Sorrel's name, the man began to tremble. "He'll kill me. He'll kill my husband if you don't talk," she cried. "They're going to hang an innocent man. Was your silence worth that?" Tears, thick and oily, began to roll down the old prospector's cheeks. "It was gold," he sobbed, the words tumbling out in a rush of guilt and fear. "Not a lot, not a huge strike, but a rich vein, running right through that section. Sarah, she hired me to do a quiet survey. She suspected Sorrel was letting his cattle graze on her land. She wanted to know the exact property line." He wiped his nose on his sleeve. "The vein? It started on DLS land, but the richest part of it ran right under Sorrel's property. Legally, it all belonged to whoever owned the start of the vein. It belonged to the DLS ranch. It belonged to Sarah. Glenna felt the blood drain from her face. She knew, she whispered. She found out Sorrel was stealing from her. She confronted him, Croft choked out. I was there. I was packing up my gear. I heard them arguing. He told her it was his secret, that he'd been working it for months. She said she was going to expose him. He got this look in his eye, a crazy look. He told her she'd never tell a soul. I ran, Mrs. Sturgill. I was scared. He caught up with me on the trail, gave me a bag full of gold, and told me to get out of the territory and never come back. He said if I ever breathed a word of it, he'd hunt me down and bury me where no one would ever find me. This was it. This was the proof. You have to come back with me, Silas. You have to testify. He shook his head, his eyes wild with terror. No, I can't. He'll kill me. He'll kill us both if we do nothing, she pleaded. Be the man Sarah thought you were, an honest man. But before he could answer, the crack of a rifle echoed through the canyon. A splinter of wood exploded from the porch post, inches from Glenna's head. At the mouth of the canyon, silhouetted against the sky, were two riders. One of them was Sheriff Belshore. The other was Luther Sorrel, a smoking rifle in his hands. Well, well, Sorrel's voice boomed across the canyon. Looks like the pretty little wife has been busy. I knew you'd be trouble. Silas Croft let out a terrified whimper and scrambled back inside his cabin, barring the door. It's over, Glenna, Sorrel said, casually reloading his rifle. You should have just accepted my generous offer. Now, I'm afraid things have to get messy. Sheriff Belshore just sat on his horse, his face pale and sweaty. He wouldn't meet Glenna's eyes. Sheriff, she screamed. Are you going to let him do this? He's a murderer. I'm sorry, Mrs. Sturgill, Belshore stammered. He has my family. Sorrel laughed, a cold, ugly sound. Everyone has a price, my dear. The sheriff's is just a little more sentimental than most. Now, come along quietly. We'll say you had a tragic accident, just like poor Sarah, and just like that old drunk in the cabin. He raised his rifle, aiming it at the cabin door, but just as he was about to fire, another shot rang out. Not from Sorrel's rifle. It came from the rocks above them. Sorrel cried out in pain and surprise, dropping his rifle as a red stain blossomed on his shoulder. Standing on the ridge above them, holding a rifle of his own, was Darvin, and behind him were a dozen DLS ranch hands, all armed. How? Sorrel sputtered, clutching his shoulder. You're supposed to be in a cell! You forgot about Billy, Darvin called down, his voice like thunder. He saw my wife ride out of town alone. He knew she was in trouble. He got word to my men, and getting out of that jail cell was the easy part. Sheriff Belshore looked from Sorrel to Darvin to the dozen rifles pointed at him. He dropped his gun belt and raised his hands in the air. Sorrel, his face a mask of insane rage, pulled a pistol from his coat. He wasn't aiming at Darvin. He was aiming at Glenna. If I can't have you, no one will, he shrieked, echoing the words from his letter to Sarah. He fired. Glenna closed her eyes, bracing for the impact, but it never came. Darvin had fired at the same time. His shot was faster, truer. Sorrel staggered back, a look of disbelief on his face. He dropped the pistol, clutched at his chest, and then collapsed in the dust. It was over. The aftermath was a whirlwind. Silas Croft, his courage returned, told his story. Sheriff Belshore, his family safe, confessed everything. The letters, the receipt, the testimony. It was an avalanche of truth that buried Luther Sorrel's empire of lies forever. Darvin was cleared of all charges. His name and Glenna's were restored. They rode back to the DLS ranch not as a man and his wife of convenience, but as partners, as survivors, as two people who had walked through fire and found each other on the other side. Spring came to the high country, washing the land clean. The grass grew green over the ashes of the burned-out barn. The sound of hammers echoed as the ranch hands rebuilt, stronger than before. And inside the ranch house, love, quiet and steady, had taken root. One bright morning, Glenna stood on the porch, watching her husband work with a young colt in the corral. Her hand rested on her stomach. A new secret. A new life. "Darvin," she called out, "can you come here a minute?" He saw the look on her face, dropped the lead rope, and strode toward her, his expression a mixture of concern and hope. "What is it, Glenna? What's wrong?" She took his calloused hand and placed it on her belly. "Nothing's wrong," she said, her voice filled with a joy so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. "Everything is right. We're going to have a baby." The smile that spread across his weathered face was like a sunrise. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around in a circle, his laughter echoing across the ranch. "A baby," he whispered, holding her close. "Sarah would have loved this. She would have loved you." "I love you too," Glenna whispered back, the words she'd been holding in her heart finally spoken. "My mysterious cowboy cattle baron." They stood there for a long time, holding each other, the future stretching out before them, bright and full of promise. The Parnell curse, the thing that had driven her across a continent in fear and desperation, was broken. But it wasn't broken by a deadline or a desperate marriage. It was broken by courage. It was broken by kindness. And it was broken by the simple, extraordinary truth that sometimes the greatest treasures in life are found in the most unexpected places, disguised as ordinary cowboys with extraordinary hearts. If you enjoyed this story, do us a favor and hit that thumbs up button. It really helps the channel out. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you don't miss a single one of our new stories. We'll see you in the next one.